Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lehigh Valley Passport to History's monthly virtual program. I'm your host, George Wacker with Lehigh Valley Would Love Media. This series airs live on third Tuesdays, and we take about 30 minutes or so of your night to highlight a different theme and discussion from participating historic sites. We have a lot tonight, which is a lot of fun. Lehigh Valley Passport to History, as you can see here at lvhistory.org, is a partnership of 50 historic sites and resources in and around Pennsylvania's Lehigh and Northampton counties. The group helps to promote local tourism and shares historical activities, events, tours, and exhibitions throughout the valley. Lehigh Valley Passport to History is funded in part with funding received through the County of Northampton's Hotel Tax Program, the Lehigh Valley County Tourism Development and Grant Program, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Visit lvhistory.org for more information. You can see their website here. Lots of fun upcoming events, and here's some of our upcoming shows. Tonight's program is historic gardening and summer kitchens, and participating speakers this evening, I'm going to bring them on one at a time. Joanne Ritter from Historic Bethlehem Museums and Sites. Yay! Anna Davis of the Historic Washington Park. Yay! Sarah Hefner of the Schwenkfelder Library and Heritage Center, and of course, Alec of Quiet Valley Living Historical Farm, which is still one of my memories from being in middle school. We visited there, and I remember it fondly. I remember it very clearly. It was a really fun time, so I always bring that up whenever we can talk to somebody from Quiet Valley. So thank you, and welcome to all of you. We have a full house this evening, so we're going to get right into it. If you're unfamiliar with how this goes, each one of our speakers is going to go through a little presentation here to give you an idea of what, in this particular case, what summer kitchens or summer gardening was like back in the old times. And Joanne, we're starting with you. You're on location. I'm going to bring you up a little bit here. You're on location at the Gundy House in Bethlehem. Yes. How are you doing?
Yes, very good. Very good. Thank you.
So tonight you're going to talk about how a summer kitchen, why it was used, was it what it was. I don't want to give too much away. We do have a lot of pictures to show, but even what types of food was eaten from it and how it was cooked. So without further ado, thank you to all of you, but Joanne from Historic Bethlehem Museums and Sites, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okie dokes. Thank you. First, we'll start with our very first picture. And that picture is indeed of the summer kitchen at the Burnside Plantation. It was built in 1825. And typically, summer kitchens are one-story, one-room buildings that are detached. You will occasionally find ones that are semi-detached, and they were quite busy places in the summertime and into the early fall, for cooking and actually processing and preserving foods, because there was no grocery stores and no electricity. So we had no refrigeration at that time. If we go to the next picture, this is the inside of our summer kitchen at the Burnside Plantation. You're looking at the open hearth, which is what all of the summer kitchens would have. In here, I tried to pick a picture that you could see a little bit of everything that gets used. Down on the lower left corner is the firebox area of the hearth, and that's where all the main cooking would be getting done. You can see a little fire is going up in the bake oven, and then the door that's below that is just for the ash pit, because they did save the ash. They utilized everything. The ash would have been used to make lye and then to make soap. If we go to the next picture, there was the one with the fire. I guess we kind of lost that guy.
Is it this one? I'm sorry, you're out of order.
That's the one. Thank you. That fire, if you see it, you will see with all this cooking. In the hearth, we can do everything that you can do in a modern stove and oven. except it gets a little warmer, which is why they would build summer kitchens when they could, because of all the heat from the fire. In the winter times, the colder days, it would be much appreciated to have that additional heat in the house. Not so much in the summer or the early fall, late spring. That fire, if you look at it, on the bottom, there are some nice red coals, and that's what we're going to end up using on our first cooking implement that I want to talk about, which is the bake kettle. Some people know it as known by a Dutch oven. Some people go camping and are used to that. They would have used it basically the same way as far as with putting a bed of those red hot coals down in the bottom, putting the kettle on, and this time we actually have a pie pan baking in there. So you would have a small trivet down at the bottom, put the pie pan on, put the lid on, and then put some of those nice red hot coals on the top. One of the things that you need to remember when you're baking this way is to divide your baking time up, that you rotate the pot around, the kettle around, and then rotate the lid in the opposite direction, because with this kind of cooking, you will have hot spots and cold spots, and you want to try to even them out. If you can see the tongs in the picture with the bake kettle, we're starting to rebuild up our fire to get some more coals going. So we can go to the next picture, and that was baking. And this now, they would use all of their cooking implements in different ways to accommodate whatever they were cooking. You can see there's a cast iron kettle that is hanging from the crane, and we have a good roaring fire going, trying to get a hard boil going so that you can use that. The other picture there is, that's actually some duck that we are actually frying to remove the fat, as that's then it ends up going into something else to further its cooking. But you can see that skillet could be hung, or that it is now sitting on trivets. You want to go to the next picture? Okay, well, this is something else that was cooking.
I did combine some of these, so I apologize.
Okay, those two pictures together are fine, and we'll jump. That's fine. You can see another type of implement that they would use in cooking is the tin-coated brass pots. And then down on the front, you can see a toaster. It's called a cake toaster that the blacksmith would have made. Blacksmiths are the friends of the cooks. They make a lot of implements that we use. Toasting bread was quite common. You could even use a flesh fork to do it, and even toast it in a frying pan. On the right side, you see the finished product of what was being cooked, and that was a root vegetable soup. The Moravians and German people ate lots of salad, lots of vegetables, lots of soups, and lots of puddings. And this receipt, which is what they called recipes at that time, was from 1787. And you can see the toast is in there. They always use toast as far as to help supplement and fill your belly up. You can do the next picture. Another frying one, and this one is some sausage and some apples. And I wanted you to be able to see that we have.
This looks delicious.
Oh, it is. It's very delicious. And then in the kettle that's off to the side, on a smaller trivet, it's a copper kettle that's tin lined that they would use. We're making with apple cider. We're making a broth kind of a sauce that gets poured over it. You can see now that the inside of the bake oven that we are starting to get a fire going in that picture. You start with the fire at the front of the oven and work your way back to heat the oven up. Usually firing up the bake oven only happened on one day a week because it was an all-day process. We found out that in this area, Fridays was usually the day that everybody was firing up their bake kettles or their bake ovens, that this was the baking day. So you start with the fire near the front and work your way back. That oven, just to preheat it, takes us 4 to 5 hours to just preheat the oven. We bake in it with no fire whatsoever. We pull out the fire, because there's the picture on breaking out the coals, and you're just baking with the heat of the bricks when you're in there. And we have some pictures of,
I have 2 left.
And you use that oven. That oven gets used all day long. It will be cooling down as the day goes on. So you start with your things that need the most heat, your bread, and then your pies and your cakes. And as the day goes on, you bake things that take less time. So while you're preheating the oven 4 to 5 hours, you're also then prepping what's going to be going into the oven. And there we have a sample of some of the things that we had baked in there.
That would be all day.
All day. You did nothing else on baking day except bake. And you were baking things as a way of providing food for your family then for the rest of the week, because you baked all your bread for the whole week in that day. That's the first thing that went into your oven. And then even overnight, you ended up putting in fruits or vegetables and herbs. I had a picture of some herbs that we had washed and we were putting in into the oven that overnight, because the oven was so slack that you could dry things in it overnight, or even make meringues. You could throw in meringues, because a lot of the baking, you separate the eggs, so they would not have wasted them.
I know we have to move on. I'm just so curious. Were summer kitchens very prevalent? You're at the Goody House in Bethlehem. How prevalent were they in? The Sun Inn has one, correct?
They have, and you will find, like a lot of times as far as with your, like your taverns and stuff, and even some of the smaller towns, they will have like the communal bake oven outside that is covered. But the summer kitchens in this area, you'll find them being built from the late 1700s all the way into the early 1900s. Because that's our foodways really hadn't changed a whole lot as far as until electricity became available for people.
Well, Joanne, I don't mean to stop you. Thank you so much. We're gonna come back to talk about some events in a minute. It's my job to keep this history train rolling. No, thank you so much. It's so interesting. And if anybody has any comments regarding summer kitchens as we go, please leave them in the comments. I saw Jim Friedman commenting. So people can always answer those questions as we go. I want to now introduce Anna Davis of Washington Crossing Park. I'm going to move over here. And today you're going to be discussing, well, hello, by the way.
Hi, how are you?
How are you? You're going to be discussing the process of creating a historic garden where none had previously existed. And same deal, I have your photos ready to go, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to you. And if you could explain what's going on here.
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, I work at Washington Crossing Historic Park in the beautiful Bucks County, Pennsylvania, right along the Delaware River. And just to orient you to the site a little bit, it is broken into various sections. So we have what we call the upper park, which is where our historic Thompson Neely House is. We also have the lower park, which is where our visitor center is, as well as Taylorsville. And both of those sites have kitchen gardens. The Thompson Neely Kitchen Garden was there when I arrived in 2014 and progresses along pretty nicely on its own. Some things I've had to remove, replace, depending on their accuracy of the time period. But for the most part, it really feeds that historic home in such a nice way because it's right off of our basement kitchen, which is a pretty fascinating part of that house there. But I really wanted to talk about our main park where the visitor center is and the Hibbs House Kitchen Garden. If you would mind putting up the first photo. So there I am in my revolutionary kit in our.
I didn't know that was you. I couldn't tell.
Yep, that's me. So this is actually the original site of our Hibbs House Kitchen Garden. And it was effective, but not particularly accurate. It kind of existed in a field away from the home. And that would have been very atypical of a classical kitchen garden, which is really quite tight to the house and really needs to feed the necessities of the home. So not just in a culinary sense, which we may think of as far as spices and some root vegetables, but also and salad greens, but also for medicinal effects. So a woman that was well versed in the medicinal properties of plants could have done very well for herself and supported her own family and maybe other neighboring families as well with her knowledge. But we also have ornamental plants in there. And I always find it really interesting to say that there's very few plants that have just one purpose. And a kitchen garden really needs to have plants that have more than one purpose to be an effective kitchen garden. So with this in mind, that this was not exactly a perfect representation that we were looking for, we started a discussion in about 2016 about how we could change the look of this historic kitchen garden. So if you want to switch on to the next slide. So that's our Hibbs house. And the first little bit of fencing, and then we continued to put the fencing up with the help of volunteers, and that went up really, really well. And then here we are building our historical trellis there, well, more of a pergola really on site, which we train our grapevines to climb over. This was all timber framed, well-researched, historically accurate style there. And so when it comes to creating, as opposed to recreating a historical kitchen garden, there are a lot of snags that you come across along the way. So we are part of DCNR, which means that we're not grandfathered in with this garden. So we really need to be mindful of modern facilities. So all of our pathways had to be ADA accessible, as well as our gateways, and even the path material as well. And it's just a wonderful thing because it really does allow anybody to be able to come in and view the garden. But it does take away a little of the historical accuracy in the sense that these probably would have just been foot-worn paths through a garden, whereas ours are quite elaborate, if you want to put up one of the next pictures there. So this was early on in the installation. There's my business partner, Ross, there. And we've just started laying the brick surrounding the beds, and we've also put in the gravel pathway. So as you can see, those are quite wide. They're about 4-foot pathways. And then down the center, which you can't see yet, there we go. Actually, yeah, that's fine. So we have 2 very long beds. This is the same side of the garden, but from a different perspective. We have 2 long beds there toward the front that aim toward our circular bed. And then we have a 4-square bed design here at the back. So those long beds are pretty classic. They're 4x20. And we loved the fact we wanted to put those in there so that they were accessible for our children's programming. This is an easy way to get a large group of kids together and have them be able to plant seeds or pot new plants, which they thoroughly enjoy. And the garden really feeds our kids' programming in such a wonderful way.
And then question, yeah. I'm sorry. What historically, that's how it was historically, to have those wide rows in there?
So
what was that for historically?
Yeah, so it's actually, I think, mostly about ease of gardening, how much you can fit in within that space, what you can access from the edge of the bed there. And then the 4-square design here at the back, we've sort of divvied up into purposeful beds. So one has dye plants, one has medicinal plants, another has, 2 of them have culinary plants. So it's a nice way to kind of direct people, and it keeps things safe. So some of those dye plants, for instance, are not necessarily something you'd want to ingest. So by keeping them separated in that way, it's a very practical sense. You could easily send the kids out into the garden to have them pick some things and know that they might stay away from that without any major risks. So when we decided to move forward with creating this garden, we had some guidelines. Obviously, the ADA restrictions were one. We also really wanted to make sure that the plants in this garden fed our programming. And I really wanted to represent multiple styles of garden design and plants that would have been found in 1776 or earlier here in America. So we sort of represent the 3 major styles of kitchen gardens, one being very formal, and that's the side that you saw there. Another being the potager garden, which is sort of a in-between, less some function mixed in with ornamentation, and that's sort of that picture right there. And then at the very rear, past the shed, there is our vegetable garden. Oh, go back one, please. Past the shed, there is the vegetable garden, and that really has more of that rustic feel to it. Yeah, so we've kind of treated it like a museum to gardening styles and plants of that time period. I find it very interesting when it comes to plants and plant selection. We put a lot of time and research into what's represented there. We have about over 230 plant species represented in our garden. And we really try to focus on those that would have been used by our demographic in Bucks County. So Scotch, Irish, and Quaker. An interesting learning opportunity is that this gives you the chance to explain natives versus invasive versus domesticated plants. And a lot of these colonial plants did come from Europe. They were what the people were familiar with in their culinary ways or their medicinal ways or their laundry ways. So we really have to stick with those. We do incorporate some natives where applicable. But it's really kind of a fun thing, you know, when people come and they say, where are the tomatoes? And I think, well, they weren't really here yet. Nobody was really using them at this scale of house. Huh. Jefferson was growing them, but, you know, he was very wealthy and prolific plant lover. So it just wouldn't have trickled down to us at that point.
That's good. I have well, no, keep going, but I have a question, I guess, for everybody at the end that I'll ask at the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly finish up with how the garden feeds our programming at the park. We have one of our major events is Colonial Days, which occur throughout the school year, and we have large groups of children that come through. So with the use of the garden, I'm able to present to them herbal medicine of the colonial period, which they tend to really enjoy. And then we also have Market and Muster and McConkey's Market. So we use products from the garden, and then we sell them on those days to help kind of feed the fundraising of the garden itself. And in fact, McConkey's Market's coming up on June 18th, so that's a good one to look out for. And then we also do one last event called You Point and We Pick. So people can come into the garden on selected days, point to the vegetables, herbs that they would like, and we'll pick them for them in exchange for a donation to the park.
Interesting.
Yeah, so at the moment, the park is undergoing a major change. We had a capital project that's been on the books for a long time, only now just began in 2020, or 21, excuse me. Sure. So while I would encourage people to visit the gardens, I will say please come in 2023 when the work there is done and the gardens have been put back to their normal, beautiful self.
Well, yeah, we love the progress, which is amazing. And we'll circle back around because I do have a question for everybody at the end. Okay. But again, and be sensitive. Thank you so much, Anna. We have to move on and sit tight because this is all interesting. We're moving on to Sarah Hefner. Let me find her with the Schwenkfelder Library and Heritage Center. And I want to turn it over to you right away. Like, can we go into your presentation? I know that a significant collection of the Schwenkfelder Library and Heritage Center is at the H. Winslow Fegley collection of glass plate negatives and photographic prints, which we're going to take a look at. These are some of the most fascinating photos we got to check out today. So, Sarah, I'm turning it over to you, and I hope I get some of these photos in the correct order.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite collections here at Schwenkfelder Heritage Center. Fegley recorded Pennsylvania German rural life. And there's a book, Farming, Always Farming, which was published in 1987. That's almost iconic now. One of my favorite look-through books just to see how life was lived at that time. If we can go to the first farmstead photo, I can. The farmsteads in the early 20th century had progressed from the early log cabins and had become well-established, prosperous farms in this area. But one of the first ingredients of a farmstead was a garden, and that still remained that way in the 20th century. Here in this photo from the farm, you can see it's really in the foreground, but you can see the garden and the fencing, and that might be a bake oven structure that's on the right-hand side.
And what about you? What year is this from?
This would be the early 20th century.
Okay.
Maybe around, I think 1910, 1920. So the farmsteads would now have the large stone farmhouses, large barns. Of course, the Pennsylvania German bank barns are well noted, and multiple outbuildings that might have included a bake oven, a summer kitchen, the wash house, chicken house, the privy, the woodshed, a dry house for drying fruit, corn crib. But the garden was the most important element close to the house. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Here's another farmstead. You can see the enclosed garden with the picket fencing. That might be a garden tool shed to the right of the garden. The gardens were still hand dug in the enclosed area. There would at this point be a larger patch for quantity production of certain vegetables that would have been done with a horse plow and some other horse-drawn equipment. But the kitchen garden would have been hand dug beds. The earliest gardens would have followed the European tradition of four-square arrangement, but there seemed to be numerous beds that varied from farmstead to farmstead. If we can go to the next photo. This photo shows the smaller kitchen garden on the right-hand side that probably went with the Großstati, the grandparents' house, the smaller house that's in front of the barn. And you can see the home orchard on the right-hand side as well. Each farmstead would have also had a home orchard of 1 to 5 acres. Apples were a very primary crop early on, used for cider, apple butter, apple schnitz, along with other tree fruit, peaches, pears, plums, apricots, and also bush fruits, raspberries, blackberries would have all been part of a garden. Gardening was done primarily by the women and the children, with the larger patch getting some assistance from the men. I think next slide. This is apple butter time. For Schwenkfelders, this is part of the traditional history. The first Thanksgiving, the Day of Remembrance, when the Schwenkfelders arrived here in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, they had a meal of Thanksgiving. This was before Thanksgiving was established as a national American holiday. The tradition has it that they had apple butter and bread. Apple butter would have been an annual event, sometimes done just in the family. Other times it would have been more of a communal festive time. You can see the crocks on the ground there that would have been filled with the apple butter. Apple butter cooking takes all day long till you get it down to that thick consistency. I've read in some literature it was referred to as Pennsylvania salve because it was a mainstay. It kept forever, and it's a very flavorful serving for your bread or your cottage cheese if you're a Pennsylvania Dutchman. Next photo. This is not a Fegley photo, but I just enjoy it so much that I included it. It shows that, yes, gardens were work and took a lot of discipline and effort, but they were also, and still are, enjoyable. And from the earliest gardens on, the Pennsylvania Germans would incorporate flowers and herbs into the garden. And I think this gardener just shows how gardens can lift your spirits too.
Sure. And this was my favorite photo. This is a fantastic photo.
Potatoes, Grimbera, they were planted and eaten in large quantities by the mid-1800s. It took a while for Europeans to adapt them when they were brought over in the 16th century from South America, but then they traveled here and were also grown by the Native Americans. But here, by this time, potatoes were a mainstay in the Pennsylvania Dutch diet, kept in storage fairly well in the basement cellars, root cellars, all winter. And here you see a family out harvesting new potatoes with their oak baskets. And this grapes were typically grown on Pennsylvania German farmsteads as well, usually Concord varieties, not the table grape varieties that we think of from the grocery store. Concord varieties are more disease resistant and hardy. They were used for wine, for jams, and one of the best Pennsylvania Dutch pies is Grape Pie. It has wonderful flavor, and it's one of my favorite pies. And I do want to mention we have our main fundraiser event coming up. That slide just shows the Penn Dry Goods Market.
Okay.
That is June 3rd and 4th. That features educational textile programs by nationally known speakers. And there's also an antiques and vintage textile show with 24 dealers. So we're returning to a live event after being only virtual last year. So
Right.
we're getting excited to get ready for that.
You can feel the energy of a lot of these fun events that you couldn't have that are now happening almost every weekend. So it's great to get into it. Thank you so much for that. I want to keep this going just because we have 4 guests tonight. Usually we only have 3 or 2. So I want to continue on and make sure, and thank you so much, Sarah. I want to continue on and make sure we get to Alec, who's a farmer at Quiet Valley Living Historical Farm, where I'm sure with many other students who can agree with me, have been here on a student field trip or something of the nature. So Alec, thank you so much. And thank you for being so patient, being our final guest this evening. And you're going to tell us a little bit about the farm itself and what you do.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much, George. And I'm glad you had a good time at our farm when you were a student. And thank you to everybody else who was just talking. It's so exciting to hear about all your projects, and hopefully I can visit you all soon, hopefully this summer. But like George said, my name is Alec. I am a farmer at Quiet Valley. Quiet Valley is a living historical farm where we do our best to showcase the lifestyle of the family that actually lived there. They're the Depper family. And we talk about how they lived throughout several generations throughout the entirety of the 1800s. So they were a family where farming was very important to them. They were a farming family. One thing that was very crucial to their success as a farming family was actually their kitchen garden. So what was important was the market cropping that they would do out in the larger fields, things they would do with the horses and the plows and all that stuff. They would get some money from that, but then to supplement that money they were actually making, they would grow crops in their garden that they then would use for themselves. Later on in the later 1800s, they actually would have something like a truck patch, which is just sort of, you can think of it like an extended version of there's our 4 square right there, our 4 square market kitchen garden. But the truck patch was like an extended version of that, where they grew some of their more favorite crops, the easier crops for them to grow, like potatoes and cabbages that they could then sell. But we'll focus on our kitchen garden right here. So you can see we have a couple of people working in one of the quadrants of our 4 square kitchen garden. Our kitchen garden, as you can see, is fenced in with that picket kind of fence there. And then it's divided into 4 quadrants. Each one is about roughly 40 feet by 40 feet square. You can see in the background of that photo, one of those quadrants is actually sectioned off into being more of a perennial herb section. We actually have pathways that run around that give us about a 2-foot wide bed that runs the inner perimeter of the fence there. So we'll talk about some of the some of the vegetables that were grown in that garden that we still are growing. By the way, this is a recreation of a kitchen garden. It is too far from the actual house where they live to make sense for their kitchen garden. So they recreated this, I think in the 80s they did that. I have not been there since then, but I'm more of a recent addition. So if you can go back to that picture, George. Thank you. So you see we have our onions here. We try and grow a lot of what they were growing back then. Onions, leeks, carrots, beets, turnips, and cabbages were some of the variety of crops that the German settlers brought over with them. You will see later on in the 1800s, people started to embrace the tomato. But for a while, that was really, people were afraid of the tomato because they saw it as a poisonous nightshade. And even though potatoes are in the same family, I'm not exactly sure why the potatoes caught on to the Europeans so quickly, but both of those, potatoes and tomatoes, are actually native to the Americas. So it's kind of interesting how things go like that. You can see here we have one of our workers here is weeding. This is actually the perennial herb garden, and that is not an ADA safe footpath there. They are a little bit wider now, but hopefully we can work on that and make our own paths wider. I'm very happy you brought that up, Anna. That's a very interesting and important thing that we should try and do to our gardens here. You can see here that we have a few more of the workers picking our herbs. Herbs were also really, really important to the survival of the family here. You can see we actually have a ton of mint just going crazy. Mint loves to grow like that. I'm not sure if you can see this very well. I wish we had a better picture of it, but the woman in the lighter clothing, you can see behind her yellow flowers. I hope you can.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So those flowers, those are actually coming off of a Roux plant, which is one of my favorite plants that we have in the garden. Roux is not an herb you hear so much about these days. It is more of a, at least here, it is more of a medieval plant, and it was used a lot back then, but today we don't really use it. It has a very interesting, powerful flavor. You can't eat too much of it because it's very bitter, but it has a lot of medicinal properties. People use it to help if they have any lung issues. There's a couple more things, but the Roux is a very cool herb that I'm happy that we keep growing that in our garden here. Another herb. Oh, yeah, we can go back to that.
Well, okay. Yeah, I have a couple more.
Yeah. So this is a bunch of wheat that we have here. This is actually, we harvested that last July roundabouts. So that is an example of something that we would not grow in our garden, but would be grown out in the field. We on the farm, we will thresh this and grind this wheat up, and we'll make flour, which we'll use in our bake oven. But a lot of this crop would actually be sold or traded in town. I think we have maybe one more picture of the wheat. Oh, so there's flax. Flax, last year we actually did a demonstration of that in our garden. That's another crop that probably wouldn't have been grown in there. They would really try to keep, vegetables, herbs, and some fruits in the garden, but we only had space in the garden for the flax, and flax was used a lot for weaving. It was so if you didn't use sheep wool for weaving, you could use flax instead, and it's a lot of work, but it's very interesting work. We'll be doing another demonstration of that again this summer, so we hope people will come to visit us for that.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to ask you. I'll start with you, Alec. And I know some people have mentioned some events coming up, but what can people look forward to at Quiet Valley Living Historical Farm, maybe in the next couple months or this summer?
Sure. So in the next couple months, we have our Farm Animal Frolic, which I'm very excited about.
Sounds fun.
Yes, we will. That will start May 21st, is a Saturday. We'll be doing it for 2 weekends. What you can look forward to for that is we'll have all of our baby animals out. They'll be under a big circus tent. You can come by, say hello to them. We'll have volunteers dressed up just like you see here, talking to you about the animals, and you'll be able to pet them and all that good stuff. We open up for summer tours on the 18th of June, and we'll be open all the way through Labor Day.
Okay. All right, I'm going to bring everyone in here. I'm so happy. Being able to go through this in 40 minutes or so is fantastic. I wish I could talk to you guys for a couple hours, but I do have a question. Well, first of all, I learned that I knew that tomatoes came here late, but I didn't know how late. Like, I didn't know even in the 1700s we were still kind of hesitant to incorporate them, which is really interesting. One question to each of you: what can the local gardener in their own backyard, what can they take maybe from some historical summer kitchens that they could start doing in their own garden? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if anybody has a recommendation, like some way that you can use some of this in your own pastime. Go ahead, Alec.
I'll have
some.
Yeah. So speaking of native plants, one plant that is native to here that I really like is something called a Jerusalem artichoke or a sunchoke. I wish we had pictures of it, but it kind of looks like a sunflower when it's growing. It grows tubers that are edible, and it is just a really hardy plant. And if you have wet soil in your backyard, you can throw a couple of these tubers in. You got to be careful because they will multiply quickly, but it is a delicious food, and you really don't have to do much to take care of it.
Yeah, it's interesting how you say too, like you were talking about the roux, which is just not is widely used today, and it's just so interesting how that was just part of our culture locally, and gone out. So,
not so much anymore.
No, I don't know. Does anyone else have any other? I know that we had talked about a couple events coming up. I don't know if anyone else had anything else to share.
You had asked about gardening techniques,
yes.
And I think the hand-dug beds are still a great technique today. Usually they tried to keep the beds small enough so you didn't have to walk on them, which then you eliminate soil compaction.
Right.
And if someone wants to try some of the heirloom Pennsylvania Dutch varieties, Landis Valley Museum has an heirloom seed program with some of the Pennsylvania Dutch heirloom varieties. That's interesting to try. Yeah. I think a kitchen garden is nice to keep small and doable before you get into a potato patch sized garden that gets away from you in mid-July.
Walk before you run in some of this stuff, but
from personal experience.
One of the fun things too would be to sort of explore some of those household uses of plants. It's very simple things like lavender in your laundry or wormwood in your cedar chest. Little things like that kind of connect you in a nice way to that past experience and make it a little bit less modern, chemically processed, those kinds of things. It's a nice way to create the history.
And I get through some of these events as they go visit you, now that we're able to do that in person, people can learn more about these things and even take some of that history home, right? and learn to do it at home. So, well, you guys, thank you so much. This was so fascinating.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody minded that we went 15 minutes over. I don't think we have one complaint. I really appreciate it. Stick tight with me for a second as we say goodbye to everybody. But again, be sure you visit lvhistory.org to learn more about Lehigh Valley Passport to History, and all of these different organizations. You can find their information on there. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. It's one of the highlights of my month. I get to learn so much and get to talk to fantastic people like you. You guys stick on for 1 minute. I want to make sure we say goodbye after this. And thank you to everybody who watched. I'm George Wacker with Lehigh Valley Would Love Media. And thank you to Lehigh Valley Passport to History for putting on these monthly programs. And we'll see you next month. Oh, wait, we have one comment. I'm going to pull it up here. Thanks. See, everybody, they comment at the end. So thank you, Susan. Thank you, Howie. And of course, thank you, Jen. We appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.